Okay, so now we're going to go through in more detail and I'll show you my example and go over the instruction for your phase one. We got to get a start of it in week 4. And so now I want to actually go through and have you see all of the things you need to include and in that do an example. So some of it will be redundant, but I think it's really good to make sure you have it. So first is just the structure. So this goes all in your public repo. So you have project P1 and then we'll do P2 and images. And this is important because that across all phases, right? Because we're going to end up having, I think, 4 phases and then a share. We'll use this same structure, and then by having the images at this level, you can always reuse images rather than to copy them again. And that's what it's saying here. P1 will contain all your project files and your README and your HTML, at least for this phase. And the images will store all images used in the project across all steps and pages. But to give you a visual, and I have just my private repo open. Here's my project, and here inside of here is my IMJ. Now I get why this could be a little confusing because we did have an IMG before, and we'll end up using this for any of the images we need for our code alongs, but for our project, I don't want to go back too far. We could have totally used one, but in this case they need to all go in this IMJ. And you can see I've already started building out project 2, but you can see the organization here. Okay, so now inside of your project 1, you're going to build your README file. And it needs to include all these things, right? Your project topic, why you chose it, your AI prompts, and some sample content. And you do need to have meaningful content. You'll hear me talk about this later. So as an example, right here is my index page. And I have, of course, some images, and I included more and that I needed to, but in this case it was fine. I ended up using some somewhere else. And but I just wanted to give you an example. So there's more content on here, and really your index page, which we'll talk about in a minute, will have more content than other things. But in your README file, so if I wanted to just go look at the README file right now, by the way, I don't have to look at it in the browser. I could look at it in VS Code, but seeing it here, I could review and I'd be like, okay, select the topic. Why did I choose it? AI prompts and the menu text, okay? Now, and so that's what I'll look for. If you didn't get this complete in your first draft, you need to make sure you have it now. So as an example, if you updated, like maybe you forgot a section, when you do your commit message, you could do README updated and then say what you updated that with. And this really starts to be clear, hopefully, that anytime you make a major change like this, you want to have a commit that relates that specific change. You don't want too much happening inside the commits because it's harder for me to reason about what you're doing. Okay, so now on this index page in the P1 folder, you want to have a heading, a main, a nav, a section, footers, and articles, okay? You also want to include an ordered or unordered list and a table. So let me just show you how you can see these. Of course, you could just see these in code. I personally like looking at them when I'm in DevTools. It just makes my life a little easier. But this same content, now again, right click, inspect, and then in here you hit elements and you can just scroll through. And the sooner you start using DevTools, the easier it will become. Okay, so then I have my header, and then I have my main, and inside of my main I have a section, right? And then I have a footer, and then if I scroll down here, we could be more specific. Oh, I have an address, and this is where it starts to get to, and by the way, don't use divs at this point. No divs at all. I will allow maybe 1 or 2 on the next phase, but not for here. So these are required. So let me slow down and cover this. These are required which means all of these for each page. Now, how you organize your sections and your footers and your articles could be different, not your footers, but your articles could be different. And some of you may have, and I noticed there was a question about this in week 4, is you might want to have a page nav. And we saw this when Dave did it, where his menu was typically his navigation to the page. And what I would say here, you want to have, if you want to do that, totally okay, but you need to have a consistent menu that I'll talk about in a minute. So you need to have used at least 3 of these items. So if I scroll down here, I see I use the address here. Okay, that's cool. And then I use detail and summary on another one. I remember looking at this earlier. I have my table. That's my table there. And by the way, you need to have the table structured with the headings and the bodies and have it be consistent with what we've learned. So then I have more figures. I have a section here with focus, right? I'm just drilling down to find that one. Oh, there it is, detail, right? My detail and summary. So in that case, I used detail, summary, and address. Okay, so you need to use at least 3 of these. You can use more, but at least 3. Okay, so now on the footer, right? So let me just kind of make this now maybe a little less cumbersome. Now on the footer, right? So for the footer, and you could look at it either here, right, to drop down that footer and look at it, right? You need a link to the AI tool you'd use for content generation, okay? And a link to the top, right? So there you go. So right there, right? I did have in here, right, and I should, that's a good reminder, because you do want a copyright in there. And, give your screen, oh, by the way, I used address too. I forgot about that as well. Okay, so now, and you do want to have external, sorry, I dropped off here. So back to the top and then a link to external references. So in my case, here are those, and that's where you want to use the underscore blank to actually show these external references. That's what's there. Now, when you're looking at your HTML outliner, and this is so important. Now, this should be true for all pages, but you can see in the index, because that's what we're talking about here, on your index, you need to start with an H1, and generally you only have one H1 on each page, and then you go at least 5 or 6. So I did 6 here, and then I have at least 1 or 2 sub levels inside of here. So you want your content organized, right? This is important. So again, if you're modifying something that maybe you missed here, make sure you validate your code. I've shown you how I do code validation, right? But if I move over to my editor and I was to pull in, let's say, my index file, then I'd run my validation. Yep, I'm good to go there. So you need to make sure, because that's one of the things for sure that I will do. Okay, and then update your meta tags. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So when I'm looking at home here, I have scream, home, right? And I probably will come up with better titles here, genres, right? Top screams, but they need to be unique, right? And then inside of your head section, you need to have some unique data for those as well, right? So that's what that means. You can copy some of it, but you at least need to have a title that's unique. So again, if you modify anything here, index may be updated and give a specific for what you created or what you did. Now, in this case, for the week 4, I only had to create 1 additional page, but for the final project, and that's what this video covers, you need to have 3 additional menu. So you have your home, you have, in this case, I have genres, top screams, Easter eggs, right? So these will link to external, HTML pages. Again, if you want to do page navigation, you can include that, but at the top of each of your pages should be this consistent menu, and whatever you've named it, notice I named it also file name genres, then has to match the content because it's basically you're defining not only the HTML file itself, but also what content is on here, right? So in this case, right? And don't include the about and the contact page. We're going to do those later. As a matter of fact, don't even really include a form in this point because we'll end up using those later, right? So don't have those on your menu. File name should always be lowercase, and this is going to be true. And actually, I'm going to be specific here because I did a little searching around about image names, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But in general, right? And I think actually dashes are actually better here. So as an example, Easter-eggs.html would make sense, okay? And actually, the reason this is true is actually for when your site gets what we call crawled by CEOs or your search engine optimizations, okay? So each page needs to follow the general layout for the index, okay? And so let's scroll up and see what that means. So they need to have, right? They need to have these required elements, right? And in this case, right, I'm not going to say 3 of the following here, but, you know, using 1 or 2 is not necessarily bad. But everything else, the footer, the HTML outliner. Now, if I go back down to here, you can see I specified that for each of these pages, right, you can have 3 to 4 heading levels under H1 and include at least 2 subheadings. So let me again show you now that I'm on a subpage what that looks like. Okay, so in this case, I have 1, 2, 3. I don't have 3, so I have 3, right? And then I have 2, I have 1 here. So I would actually need an additional sub-level here for this page to meet the requirements of how much content I would have on it. And again, you can reuse remember what your metadata is. It's up in the head section, right? Your name, the description, but specifically the title definitely needs to be unique, okay? And then include a link to the home page, right? So for any of these, that's why this menu needs to be consistent to where even if I'm here, I can always go back to the home, okay? All right, so now meaningful content, and this is important because I've said you can use AI to generate your content, but part of this is understanding how to find the content you want to have for your page, and then organizing that on your page. And on these sub pages, and even on your main index page, you want to have enough content that conveys to not just your user, but to me, right? That you have that what you're trying to say, what your site is about. Okay, so I said make sure you have meaningful content on your pages. Yes, it's fine to use generated content if you need a specific number, 100 words per section. And what that means is, like, for your articles, right, you need 100 words there, right? So that's if you need a number, but really what I'm looking for is it meaningful. Now, again, you're going to need to, for your final version of this, add these additional pages, make sure they validate. And again, if you'd already added one, then be specific on your commit message, because this is also part of how I'm going to grade you, because everybody has at least had a beginning of this. And now you'll be getting it ready for this final submission. Okay, I spent a little time thinking about images here, right? So every page needs at least 1 image, and the index needs 3. You can absolutely use AI tools for generating this stuff. Now, all your images need to be placed inside that image folder, and then using the following attributes, right? Alt has to be their title, height, and width. I'm going to talk about height and width in a minute because something came up in the way that I saw students doing some things I want to be clear about. And then lazy loading where it makes sense. So, like, as an example, and this is not a hard and fast rule, but in this case, this image wouldn't be lazy loaded. This one probably wouldn't be, but I could lazy load these, meaning I could load them after the first render so that users don't see that lag. But you always need to wrap your images in Fig and Fig caption, okay? And in this case, I ended up, and I'm going to change all of mine to be true, but let me show you how. I think on the Easter egg one I did this, yeah. So then I just linked, in this case, and as long as if you want to do a description, that's fine. I ended up linking, and that's what this is, a site of the image. But I'm not gonna be hard and fast about that. But if you just want something to put there, you can. Now, naming standards are lower cases, no spaces, right? And in this case, hyphen. And I've given you an example here of what that fig and fig caption in here, right? So all of the images, no matter where they're at, need that. So if I right click and I hit inspect, I can see, okay, yeah, that follows that, okay? But here's something I noticed about, and this is why I put this particular section on here, was image optimization cheat sheet for the web, because this is something Dave's going to cover later about using responsive images, and we're not doing that yet. But there is, it's never too soon to start thinking about the image size relative to where you've indicated on, in this case, in height and width, right? So height and width. So let me show you an example of something I saw fairly common in student submission. And I think I put it on top screens right here. Yeah. Was it top screen? No, genres. That's right, genres. So notice how this image A looks kind of stretched out, not necessarily right, okay? So when I right click and hit inspect, I'm giving you an example of one thing I saw that I want to make sure you've corrected. So I'm actually going to bring this over and make this a little bigger. So when I roll my mouse over this image, I can see it's in the right location. It's in images, slice of life. And notice how I named it. I named it with dashes, and I named it at the end with the actual resolution of the file itself. Okay, and this becomes important because later when we might want to have responsive images, now you don't have to do this part, but it just helped me organize it, and I thought I would give you the example. But more importantly is notice that the image itself is its intrinsic size. That means its actual size on the system. This is its resolution, and this is its image size. But in the page, I'm rendering it to 300 by 300, and I think students felt like by changing the height, right, the height and width there, that was actually changing the image, and it's not. And for this project, for this step of the project, I actually want these to match this size of whatever you want in your page, right? So that's what's important. So 300 by 300 does not match the actual size. So I should not see, this should be the intrinsic size, should be whatever I actually wanted the rendered size to be. So I shouldn't be not matching in the width and height, right? Or changing it for it to fit here. So that's part of what I will look for. And I'm going to show you actually how to fix it in this case, right? So let me actually go over to my editor here. Let me bring up my genres, right? And so here, in this case, I have my image. Now, in my images folder, I ended up creating an image for 300 by 300. Right? Because I was like, that's more of what I want. And actually it was 300 by 450, so 300 by 450. So in my HTML for my genres, right, first I would change my image to that 300 one, okay, that I resized. Now, however you, and it's probably something I'm going to ask in attendance, is what are you using to modify your image sizes, right? So what I'd want here, right, and this is what's important to understand, and this is 450, okay, by 300 now, right? And now we could talk about in a second, but let's actually go look at the output, right? So if I and it's actually already refreshed. And so now when I look at this, oh yeah, right? So it actually is looking right. Right? So it's a rendered aspect ratio, which is fine. It's 450, right? Rendered size is 300. Is that right? Do I have that right? It looks right. This looks really good. Slice of life there. Hold on just a second. So what was throwing me off there for a minute, and this is where it's nice to actually list the width and the height based on the actual image size, else you'll get a little confused by that, right? So again, you don't have to change it to specify at the end of the file, but you do need to have the dashes for in the file name. It's very helpful. If you're using a single word, that's fine. If you're using multiple words, use a dash. But in my case, I'm using an editor that outputs to PNG. I don't even specify because you can use other things as well. Now, in this case, I'd take off lazy loading because it's actually at the top of the page. So that's where I'd come over here and go, you know what? Actually, lazy loading does not make sense for that particular one because it's more at the top of the page. But I started thinking about this and I thought, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to provide this content because I think it's never too soon to start thinking about that, it should match. But if for some reason on screen you wanted to change it, like if you had an image that was 200 by 200, you could change that width and height, by half. But you wouldn't want to do anything, less than that because then you're adding to your page height or your page loading. And when you were developing web pages, this is an important topic, right? And this starts talking about why. Okay. But in general, I think the better thing to do is actually for this assignment is actually just match your rendered size in your width and height so that A, it looks right, and B, it doesn't add to the page load. But more importantly, it clearly demonstrates that the importance of it because I saw several examples of this in the first draft. But I thought it never hurts to talk about these because we're going to talk about responsive images later. Okay. So validate your code. Again, if you modified, you added images, that is put the commit message that are appropriate. Now, in this case, you also want to have a sitemap. And so this is not one of the three, and this is important. This is not one of those those pages, right? So in this case, we end up adding a total of, if we don't count the index files, as a matter of fact, let's just go look. You can see it in mine, right? So I have my index, my genres, my Easter eggs, my top screens, and my site. So a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 HTML, and my README, which is not, of course, an HTML file. Okay, so let's scroll back down. So in this case, you do need to add that site HTML page, right? We're going to later fill in a color palette. I ended up playing with mine a little bit, and you do need them linked at the bottom of each page. I ended up creating an image, and then for our next phase, we'll end up doing something with the color palette, but I just added something. And yeah, you want some kind of image on your sitemap. Even though I've included the navigation here, the sitemap page itself would end up being all the pages that you have on your site because we will have some that aren't necessarily on our menu. Okay. All right, so sitemap, right? So we have the color palette, section 1, there we go. And then section 2 is the sitemap itself. And then link this to all previous, so all of your pages, right? So if I go to any of the pages, I should be able to get to that. And again, the idea here is when you're linking back as an example on any of them, right? Just put the actual page and don't use any of the / dots there. Okay. Before moving on, right? So make sure your HTML is ensure it's clean and well formatted. No CSS. I actually do take off for that, right? And then continue refining your pages, right? So in this case, if you had a specific thing after going through the requirements that you realize you needed to do, I want to see these commits because that's part of how I'm going to grade this, right? So these points here are for meeting all the requirements and having commits that actually are specific enough to the thing that you've done. And of all these points, 20 points is actually from how well you've organized and thought about, because remember, your site's conveying a concept. So you want to have a organized concept, then your subpages help then tell a specific part of your concept. Okay, I hope this helps you out. I'm probably my goal here, and I would say this is the sooner you can submit this assignment, the sooner I can review and give you feedback so that you can fix it. So it's one of those things that if you're submitting late, you don't get that benefit. I mean, I'm still going to give you the feedback, but in that case, fixing it means you got to use late passes. But at this point, my suggestion is just to make sure that you follow my suggestions. And I hope this part of the image optimization doesn't confuse you because we haven't quite covered that yet. But the idea that if you're going to use an actual image size, but your on-screen rendering is your width and height that you specify within the image sort, the attribute in there. If I saw that you actually had a 200 by 200 image, the actual size, but you rendered it down to 100, I would be okay with that within these ranges. But I saw many examples in the draft that we did where students were actually having images that were much larger, but I want you to know that doesn't change the file size. And there may be times where, and this what this talks about later, we want to have large image resolutions, but in this case we use those for hero images and maybe full screen banners, stuff like that. Okay, hope this helps you out. Do give me, to submit it, your commit history on the actual phase one project. Okay, see you later.